The Forest. This creepypasta made from written by T.F. Ahmad. Edited by Groshek. Thumbnail art by Groshek. Narrated by Not Applicable. I spent my childhood in a small town. Long, winding single-lane roads with speed limits that topped out at 70 miles per hour were common. Modest-sized houses on large lots dotted the landscape, innumerable trees providing privacy and anonymity. One of those houses was mine. It was set back from the street about 100 feet behind a row of tall slippery elms that lined the road. A gravel path wound around hedges and between a waist-high wooden fence. I never had any siblings, so my free time was spent with an open book clutched in my hands. My parents encouraged this isolating activity, as it kept me out of trouble, out of the road, and out of the woods behind my house. These woods were thick, effectively blocking out what lay beyond my backyard. Though there was a high fence enclosing our property, getting into the forest was as simple as moving aside 2 panels that had been knocked loose by my dad's lawnmower. To me, those loose panels were an invitation to a world begging to be explored. My parents did not see it that way. "You could get lost out there," was a typical warning from my mother. "Once you get a certain distance in, you won't be able to tell which way is north or south. You never know what kind of animals are out there, son," my father was fond of saying. "There are wolves and coyotes and possibly even bears." These warnings never frightened me. What did frighten me was a tale my friend Scott told me. "You know the real reason your parents won't let you in those woods, right?" he asked one day when we were sitting on my back patio sipping cans of Pepsi. I was in my favorite chair, a white recliner with soft floral print cushions. Scott sat cross-legged on a bench made of dark brown wood nearby. We were both facing the forest, watching as the sun started to approach the tops of the trees in the purple-orange sky. I believe we were both 11 at the time. "No," I answered. I wasn't sure if I should have felt embarrassed at this admission. Scott slurped the last drops of cola out of the lip of his can and set it on the wooden floor of the deck. He straightened like he was ready to deliver a speech. Anticipation painted his face. "There's a place in the woods," he began, "a very specific place. You'll only find it if you're looking for it, and even then, you may not find it." He reached down for his Pepsi but jerked his hand back, remembering it was empty. I shook my half-finished can at him, and he nodded. I went into my kitchen through the sliding glass doors on the deck and grabbed 2 fresh Pepsis. "Hey Scott," I asked, tossing him his soda. He looked up at me. "What did you mean when you said even then you may not find it?" "I mean," Scott said, opening his soda, "that you have to want to find it. Like, desire it so bad that you don't care what else happens." Though I had no idea what Scott meant by this, my spine tingled. The light outside was slowly disappearing as I took my seat. "Anyways," my friend continued, "this place is a sacred place, like very important to a certain group of people." "Indians?" I blurted out. We had just watched The Shining earlier that week, and Indian burial grounds were fresh in my mind. "No, stupid," he said, smiling. "It's important to the doorway seekers." He had to be messing with me. The doorway seekers? That sounded like something he pulled out of his ass. Scott looked at me with an expression that was part victory and part anticipation. I gestured him to go on, and he did. "The doorway seekers, or just plain seekers, are a kind of satanic cult, dude. They, like, worship Satan." Scott shook his head. "No. These guys are different. They believe that in order for the world to keep on existing, there has to be some evil in it. They think that without evil to balance out the good, the world will be destroyed." My attention was his at this point. I still was sure he was fucking with me, but it was an interesting story. They're called the doorway seekers because they're always looking for entrances into hell that are spread out all over the world. They use these doorways to release a calculated amount of evil into the world, just enough to keep the world in balance. He leaned in closer. and one of those doorways is somewhere in that forest. I shuddered. Say what you will about Scott, that guy can tell one hell of a story. I looked towards the thicket of trees beyond the fence and noticed night was approaching. The thin space between the trees was pitch black, hiding an uncounted number of unnameable horrors. I went to take another sip of Pepsi but noticed I had bled my can dry. Chuckling, I put the can down. Scott must have noticed the awkwardness of my chuckle because he eyed me with concern. You all right? He asked, his small hands crushing his own empty can. Yeah, I said. The same awkward chuckle escaped my lips again. That was some story. Oh, that was no story, Scott said. Another Pepsi? I held my hands up like a criminal caught in the crosshairs of a determined cop. Oh no, no more for me. Any more of these, and my teeth will fall out of my mouth. A silence followed, punctuated by the passing of a car on the distant main road. Hey, Scott? Yeah? Are there any seekers here in Oak Lake? He thought for a moment before answering. You know what, he said. I'm not really sure. I never tried to verify Scott's story. Why bother? As far as I was concerned, the whole thing was an elaborate fiction, a good story to tell around the campfire to your friends. I certainly never asked my parents if they'd heard of the doorway seekers. I did not forget about the story, but I tried to put it out of my mind. I'd arrive home by early afternoon from swimming camp down at the middle school. I read books in my bedroom or watched whatever was on Cartoon Network to pass the time. When I looked towards the forest, all I saw was the gentle, lazy swinging of the branches and the play of light and dark between the leaves and the recesses of the forest. At night, however, Scott's story became a frightful focal point in my mind. There would be a faint rustling from between the walls, or a dog barking in the distance, or my parents shuffling about the house, and I would think of hell and doorways. I would look up from my book or from the television and stare out the window at the forest, its arms in the form of trunks and its fingers in the form of branches reaching out from the darkness to grab me. Scott hadn't said much in his story at all, just that there was a doorway to hell in the forest behind my house. No gruesome details, no human sacrifice, no blood or guts. But that small story had been enough. For a boy with a wild imagination, it was enough. That is why I don't know what compelled me to start going for walks in the forest. Maybe I wanted to prove Scott and my parents wrong. The forest wasn't dangerous, it wasn't evil. Or maybe I thirsted for an adventure like Captain Morgan in Cup of Gold. Or maybe I was just bored. I only went for walks during the day, tearing off my clothes after the bus dropped me off from swim camp. I would squeeze into a fresh shirt, sweatpants, and secure, lime green running shoes. I'd put on my Cubs baseball cap and grab my mom's sunglasses from her dresser. She wouldn't miss them. I also grabbed my father's hunting knife, just in case. That first time, I crept across the lawn to the fence that backed up for the first line of trees. I was afraid someone would see and tell my parents, ending my first act of rebellion before it even began. After removing the 2 loose planks from the fence, I crawled through the opening. There was no ceremony, no real threshold to cross besides the fence. The forest didn't seem as dense up close. Walking between the trees was surprisingly easy. My path was dark, the cover of the trees cast and almost total. However, an occasional opening allowed in a bullet of sunshine. The first bullet shocked my vision when I looked up.